But being Cassandra happens to be a principal choice when there is cause for alarm. There's a woman named Chan Im who might teach us certain things about perception, despair, and what lies beyond. She's a Cambodian in her mid-60s, living in the refugee enclave known as Little Phnom Penh in Long Beach, California. She is a survivor of the killing fields. She's blind, but there's nothing physiologically wrong with her eyes. Her affliction is called, quote, hysterical or psychosomatic blindness, and she is one of approximately 150 female Cambodian refugees who have lost most or all of their sight, the largest known group of such victims in the world. Chan Im simply has seen too much. Her village was seized and turned into a prison farm by the Yanka, the Khmer Rouge police force composed largely of young boys. Most of her family were slaughtered before her eyes. She worked an average of 125 hours a week and lived on one small bowl of rice a day. She watched many starve to death. She watched still more beaten to death or burned alive. One day, she remembers, they picked out one woman and one man and hit them again and again. She began crying again and couldn't stop. She recalls that it felt like there was a big needle pushing through my head. And when at last she stopped crying days later, she could no longer see. No male refugees are known to suffer from this blindness, although the reasons why are unclear. For one thing, there are almost no male refugees. 80% of the 1.5 million people killed by the Khmer Rouge were men between the ages of 20 and 50. 2 women in Los Angeles, one an associate director of clinical electrophysiology, and the other a California State University psychologist, have been working with Chan Im and other Cambodian women so afflicted. For years, these women, some of them suicidal, had suffered in silence, too terrified of authority to seek medical help, isolated in a foreign culture, prey to hideous nightmares, flashbacks, and traumatic disassociation, and consumed by the classic, survivor guilt, comparable to that suffered by Holocaust victims. Among the approximately 100 sightless women that these 2 women have examined, the commonality are striking. Now between ages 50 and 70, at least half suffer from agoraphobia and dare not leave their homes. All endured forced labor, later squalor and violence in refugee camps. Almost all had lost family members. Most had been forced to watch the tortures and the executions. And the 2 women have begun to interest the refugee women in life survival skills, very slowly. How to ride a bus, how to talk on the telephone. Many of the survivors were too afraid. Some even moved away. They didn't want to participate. But 15 agreed to try, and Chan Im was one. Today she can see well enough to ride a city bus, to go to the supermarket, to cook her own dinner, to even venture out for a short walk. On the bus, what must she see? She must look out through the dirty glass pane at a blur of frowning people hurrying through their lives. At the supermarket, she must stand stunned before the bright mounds of oranges and melons, onions and cabbage, the bulging sacks of rice, the tiered tins of soup, the stacked boxes of tea, the cardboard, the aluminum, the fluorescent lights, the smooth rolling silver carts, the labels, the reds, the blues, the yellows. And one can only wonder when she ventures out to take a slow, shuffling walk, what Chan Im sees. If you in the future who read these words still follow the ways of my epoch's logic, then you will misread so much of what I have to say to you as primitive. But if you exist, I must believe that you have evolved into trust. Indeed, if you have not, there will be so few or so many of you enduring such tormented or anesthetized lives that you won't have either the capacity or the inclination to read this artifact. Indeed, you will have already erased me utterly for daring to be what I am, a memory of the future. So I must assume that you are not merely the last of my species, but the first of my kind. To you, then, I will confess several secrets I dared not utter aloud except to 1 or 2 others in my own epoch. They're humble secrets. They're of no great import, but they grow in me toward your birth. Now, it's perplexing to find the language with which to speak to you, since I frankly am no longer interested in words for which people have killed and died. And the richness of my epoch's language depends on such utterances. Now, that my eccentricity eliminates such words as patriotism, wealth, fame, religion, category, revenge, custom, security, authority, zoo, stranger, normal, envy, tradition, conquest, race, triumph, alliance, territory, nation, youth, age, tribe, enemy, boredom, empire, ambition, ideology, manhood, and power, to name only a few, I count this loss as a loss of little consequence. That the word language itself, not as communication but as impediment, belongs by all rights to be on that list, that, as a writer, I count as a threat of considerable proportions. What is serious, I admit, is the rapidly expanding inventory of all those concepts I do not understand, although I did understand them when I was younger. For example, I realize that I do not understand justice. I would once have said that my life was given over to the pursuit of justice. If so, I'm relieved that I got it back. Injustice, I understand. Now, well may you say that this is because injustice has been part of my experiencing and witnessing. But it's not so simple. Mercy, I understand, and even fairness. And I've experienced, frankly, little of either. Regret, I comprehend, and remorse. Even righting an injustice, that I understand. But justice? At best, it reeks of bargains, pettiness, hypocrisy. At worst, of retribution, vengeance, deals. It pretends that suffering can be weighed and computed, bought off, made whole. Why would the oath, "God give me the wisdom to temper justice with mercy," be necessary unless justice was inherently cruel? It stinks of punishment, of jealous and vengeful Judeo-Christian gods. It's a lazy settling for less than imaginative solutions, ones that might invoke words like transcendence, transformation, grace. The only justice I can catch a glimmer of is poetic justice, but that's really only a two-worded synonym for irony, and so far at least, I still understand and I retain an affection for irony. Now, no longer understanding justice puts me out of step with some of the best minds of my era, although there's some comfort in knowing that it also puts me out of step with some of the worst ones. You see how stupid I am becoming. Furthermore, time is also quite beyond me now. I once thought I understood time in a basic sort of way. Clocks, calendars, all those imposed and imposing measurements that we devised to pace off eternity. When I learned that others, far more precociously stupid than I, had realized time and space were identical and indissoluble, I became quite excited. But of late, I cannot grasp time at all, not even in terms of space, because how space itself flies, but especially not in terms of the singular. That is, I cannot see time for all of its variant times. There is, for example, flying south time to the Canada geese. There is berry time to the juniper bush. There is hyacinth time to the bulb. There is nova time to the aging giant red star, and dividing time to the blastula. These lend considerable perspective to such arbitrary notions as meet you at 3:15 sharp at the corner of 5th and 42nd Street, useful though such a phrase may be. Still, geese and juniper, hyacinth and sunstar, and cell are never late, nor early. Being gradually divested of vocabulary is part of my problem in addressing you, which is why I will have presumed upon your patience with what in my day would have been called disjointed thoughts. Now, since it's now believed that the brain is less like a computer than a self-regulating organ, and since every thought was, after all, once a chemical, which means that mind becoming matter is a chemical process, as is matter becoming mind, never mind, isn't it difficult to imagine how any fresh thoughts could originate as other than disjointed? Most of my contemporaries would tell me not to mind. But you, of all people, know what a strange appetite the brain has when you let it free to graze. Which is to say that if the likes of you rise from the ashes of us, it will be despite and because of what Chan-Im saw and sees, despite and because of what the Nushi authors knew. But how do we speak to one another in a language not our own? And how do we read one another if we cannot see? We would need to go beyond the pictographs of mere descriptive meaning. We would need to enter into the local dialect, as it were, toward the phonetics of reality. We would need to speak in metaphor. Not simile, mind you, for the English majors like me out there. Not simile, that well-meaning but cowardly like and as if, that sort of middle-of-the-road, wishy-washy approximation that feels compelled to over-explain itself. No, metaphor, the essence of the thing itself, sufficiently tiny, unique, and specific to attempt an implosion into the universal. For example, geophagia is the name for an uncontrollable desire to eat earth. Perfectly healthy, well-adjusted citizens in certain communities around the world enjoy eating dirt or clay. Some become connoisseurs partial to different kinds of soil. Many prefer to crumble it onto a cookie sheet and bake it for a few minutes so as to intensify the pleasure of the crunch. Less than a craving, but more than a preference. This is neither a religious nor cultural practice, nor is it a superstitious fetish. Earth eaters are found in considerable numbers in the U.S. agrarian South, where the phenomenon constitutes a bond between those blacks and whites who both practice it. When circumstances force these rural people into urban surroundings, they sometimes must content themselves with store-bought starch or chalk. Only recently have scientists realized that the particular earth or clay chosen for eating is rich in dietary nutriments and may in fact contain natural medicinal value for a range of ailments from indigestion through ulcers to colon cancer. All known earth eaters are women. Another metaphor. Who invented the question mark? Encyclopedias are quite mute on the subject, but the mystery haunts me. Suzanne K. Langer, who was a Nushi writer disguised as a philosopher, wrote, "The notion of giving something a name is the vastest generative idea that was ever conceived." But surely the notion of giving such an intangible emotion as curiosity a permanent symbol runs a close second. I think it's not illogical, even in my millennium's rather cramped sense of logic, to hypothesize that a woman invented the question mark. And for that matter, probably the question itself. Such innovations spring from need. If, for instance, you are forbidden to learn to read and write, you create a means of language. If you are forbidden knowledge, you devise the question. If you are forbidden both literacy and knowledge, don't you invent the question mark? Dearest friend of my imagination's optimism, across 100 centuries I grope toward you, from years of seeing both too little and too much, out of a longing to think in common with my kind. Because you will have grown beyond justice, you will not need to judge us. You may even smile, feeling something between recognition and respect in compassion. But please know as well that we were capable of defiance, even of joy. Know that when they vowed we would never forget their martyred battle heroes, we bent our energies on the heresy of forgetting. Know that we were no longer able or content to encounter or render surfaces, no matter how tempting their density nor how seductive their luminosity, but were drawn instead to what lives beneath the facade, to geometries of the bone, to refrains of the blood. know that we sometimes even dared the grace of laughing at ourselves. There were more than a few of us, trying to find one another, often in rage and bereavement, sometimes in desire and delight. It was not simple or easy, but it was not as difficult as we pretended or feared. And the miracle that will be was that we who believed that this might be buried with us, because we valued it so, because they could not understand it, because it was secret, because it could be reread only after our death, all these 1,000 years later is in your hands, one of the 12 who can still decipher it. Find the other 11 and begin again in Blastula time. Thank you. Well, as you can see, it's a very weird essay. And I thank you for hearing it and for the amazing, well, in the 60s we would have called it vibes, and it's still a pretty good word that you sent out to me during the reading of it. I do, however, want to open this up now so that we can talk to and learn from each other and argue and question and answer and stuff. And I'd like to, this is feminist tradition here, even if I have jettisoned the word tradition. It's a nice practice to start with any announcements of anybody making good trouble, demonstrations, seizures, occupations, picket lines, organizations, upcoming meetings, etc. So if anybody has any announcements, it's not, if you think of it later and you want to mention it later, that's all right too, but now's a good time.
I just wanted to announce that the Students for Equality at U of One campus working on the Equal Rights Amendment are meeting this coming Thursday at 7 in room 248 of the Union. Also, there's a walk for equality and a rally that's coming Saturday the 10th, and it's going to start at Camp O'Neill at 9:30 is the walk, 11:30 is the rally. There are going to be free hot dog drinks and good speakers, so please come and help out with that. And lastly, Ellie Smeal is going to be speaking in this same room on the 13th at 8 p.m. So please come out for all of those things. We need some help. Thanks.
Did everybody get the dates and the time?
And they're all on the yellow flyer, so take it with you and hold on to it.
That's an organizer. Anybody else? Are there any other announcements in particular? Yes?
This is not listed in your Women's Week schedule, because this was scheduled separately by the YWCA, but there will be a program this coming Wednesday on enhancing communication between Black and white women. And this Wednesday it'll be a somewhat informational presentation, and then the next Wednesday, also at lunchtime here in the Union, will be just an open discussion based on the information presented on Wednesday at noon time. So come to Union, it's on the second floor somewhere.
It's on the second floor somewhere. Juniper time. Are there anyone else? I should make a quickie announcement of my own, or else my sisters back at Ms. will kill me if they hear I didn't. And then we can go to any questions and stuff, which is to say that for those of you who might not know this, since July of 1990, Ms. has been wonderfully free of advertisements. That's the good news. That means that we actually have a free press again, that we can name names, that we can be outrageous, that we can bring back fiction and poetry, that we can do international coverage, and that we can be audacious and all the other things that you cannot be when you take advertising. It also means that readers don't have to thumb through scratch and sniff ads about the latest perfume or ring around the collar or waxy yellow buildup on their kitchen plate in order to get to any reading matter. The bad news is that we don't have advertising subsidy. because in fact in this country, unlike many other countries, magazines really are kept alive not by their subscribers or their readers, but by advertisers. And they are in indentured servitude to those advertisers. When we started this experiment, everyone in the magazine world said, not possible, won't fly, I mean, yes, for small literary journals that's possible, but no mainstream magazine has ever in the history of the country switched to not taking advertisement and being reader-driven and survived. Well, I'm very pleased to tell you that 2.5 years later, we just celebrated our second anniversary. I think, in fact, there are some copies of the anniversary issue over there. There was the July-August issue. We are alive and well, indeed, I must tell you. And everyone in the magazine industry cannot figure out how this happened. It happened because of wonderful readers. It happened because of women and some men of conscience who keep writing in letters using the metaphor of food, in fact, saying, oh, I was so tired of junk food. This is nourishing. This is satisfying to me. Now I feel fed. One woman's called it chicken soup for the soul. But a magazine also stays alive not only by those who come on board, but by those who renew. There are continual, relentless, and ongoing pressures for this magazine to lower the quality that we've striven for in the last 2.5 years, to cut back on the international coverage, to cut back on the multiculturalism, to cut back on the lack of tokenism, but the thorough weaving throughout the entire magazine of all of the people who were tokenized, even in the old Ms, lesbian women, very young women, old women, African American, Asian American, Native American, Latina, women who are disabled, all of the outs, all of the have-nots, all of the silenced voices or the tokenized voices. There is continuing pressure, and we need you on board to stem that pressure. So if you are not a subscriber, think about becoming one, please. There are subscription forms, I think, over there. There are certainly some in the magazines. If you are a subscriber, do stay with us and renew. Think about giving the magazine as a Christmas gift or a Hanukkah gift or a Kwanzaa gift or a holiday something to friends, because we are the only magazine of this sort in the world that is trying to do this and be owned only by readers and answer only to readers. And without you, we'll go down. I assure you that the far right still attacks us. They still try to get distributors to take it off newsstands. We still get periodic boycotts, either by the Catholic Church. You can always tell because the letters will look exactly the same. It means priests have gotten up in some pulpit in one entire state and so forth and said we're baby killers and bad people. Or that we're too radical, or that we're too international, or that even though I think it's something like 5 to 6% of coverage in any one issue is on any one particular group, we're too lesbian. Homophobia is alive and well and out there. Racism is alive and well and out there. And when we are trying to actually, in each issue, create 100 pages that reflects and looks like and mirrors who we really are around the world in our amazing diversity and the incredible richness of our difference and the incredible celebration of where we do overlap and as we do dialogue with each other, it's not easy. We never thought it would be easy, as in the chapter, not easy and not simple, and we chose this task, and we're very damn proud of what we've done so far. But we need you with us. So that's my announcement. Now, have we got any questions? You're all going to go silent on me. Either that or you want to go direct to the reception and have something to drink. One of the two. No questions.
Oh, let's have it.
See, like somebody gets desperate at the last. Okay, there was these, you, and then.
What's been one of the hardest things for you to do in the last 20 years?
Oh, what an interesting question. She said, what's been one of the hardest things for me to do in the last 20 years? Well, I'll just stand around here for 15 minutes and think. I think the consistent hardest thing has been finding my niche. I like to go around and saying that patriarchy, the genius of patriarchy lies in compartmentalizing by age, by race, by sex, by class, by sexual preference, and the genius of feminism is in making the connections. Well, that's true. But there's a particular ongoing agony for somebody who is a writer and loves words, and in one sense is doing most what she secretly feels she was put on the planet to do when she's sitting in some quiet room wearing, her silly fuzzy slippers and some kind of schmata robe with her hair going in 50 different, it's 4 o'clock in the morning and there are 5 cups of half-finished tea on the desk and the cat is purring in the corner and she's writing. Whatever I do, being female and having Jewish ancestry, I feel guilty. Now, some of you will recognize this. In other words, when I'm writing, I feel, my God, this is self-indulgent. I should be at the barricades. I should be at the press conference. I should be demonstrating. I should be at the picket line. I should be down at this women's center. I should be da-da-da-da. I should be organizing. When I'm organizing, I think to myself, this is really crazy. I mean, we can stand at a street corner for the next 60 years leafleting, and one book goes to more people and lasts longer. It's very hard, the going back and forth. I'm 51 now, and very proud of this, and I've come to a point around in my late 40s where I finally decided that stupid, it's not either or, dumb, remember both and. You don't often apply these things to yourself. It takes you a while. It's sort of like remedial living. So you go around and you tell other sisters to stand up for yourselves and also be healthy and take care of yourselves and eat right. Meanwhile, you are junk fooding it and you're not you're falling to bits and pieces. So finally, your lesson begins to come home. And sometime in my late 30s, I thought to myself, okay, let's just understand this dichotomy is with us until we pass into the great feminist beyond here, or at least into the old feminist home, which probably will be in the next 15 minutes, and listen for the organic rhythm or something between it. And I have begun to do so. So that now what I realize is that if I am too long isolated in writing, that's not healthy for me either. I need to get out and learn from and talk with and hear from my people who are women. And that's my real food. And that's organizing. That's another form of organizing. And if I do that too long, I tend to get very cranky because I'm very tired. And then I've got all of this thoughts and all of this wisdom from women, and I want to get it down and out so it can reach others. It's sort of like being a town crier. You go from one place, basically passing along what women have taught you someplace else. Now, I had that worked out to a pretty good rhythm, so many months on the road. Then along came this chance at Ms. And frankly, you see, I set up these ridiculous terms when I came. I had been a contributing editor at the magazine for 10 years, but that was no problem. I had mostly written articles and tried to network them with radical feminist writings. And at a certain point when the magazine was sold, and in its attempt to stay alive in a commercial market, it began doing movie star covers and wine columns. I removed my name from the masthead. When they came to me and said, okay, we would like you to now come on board as editor-in-chief, I set up what I thought were these completely crazy terms, and I thought, hey, no problem, safe. I said, I want total editorial autonomy. I want to make it international. I want to bring back, poetry and fiction, which has basically been totally driven out of women's magazines. It will be in every issue, shot through in every department with multiculturalism. And no advertising, because otherwise there's no editorial freedom. And to my absolute horror, they met my terms. So that has kind of disrupted this terrific organic rhythm I had found there for a while. And this is now a difficult period in the sense where I'm trying to refine some rhythm to do the writing and some rhythm to be on the road and talk with people, not only in this country but internationally, because that's like family reunions for me, and I desperately hunger for that. I really thirst for it, and I also thirst for alone time to write, whereas the magazine doth bestride my life like a colossus for about 12, 15 hours every day. So, but that, as I look back over my long political, that would be the most consistent, difficult thing, balancing. And that doesn't even factor in, you know, like one's life, like one's child, like one's relationships, family, friends, etc. But those all somehow had a place and made places for themselves, and I adapted to them and they to me, and so forth. These two, the two demands of these, that whatever you were doing, you felt guilty for not doing the other thing, was the most consistent refrain over the years. Now you see, but that kind of question will live with me, and I mean, I'll be in 6 other states from now, and I'll finally have the answer. No, that was more difficult. No, that was more difficult. You had one, and then there was somebody over here.
How do you deal with the response to women like Phyllis Schlafly?
How do I deal with the women like Phyllis Schlafly? Or with women like Phyllis Schlafly, or the response to them, to her? Look, I mean, let me put it this way: if Phyllis did not exist, they would have invented her. You know, I mean, but it's true. It's just there is no. At one point, Phyllis is the only nationally known woman who takes that kind of position. Do you understand? I mean, none of the other Republican women, even the very right-wing Republican women, take those positions. Anita Bryant took those positions and has recanted, although the press never gave her recantation the coverage that it gave her homophobia and her anti-womanism. What can I say? I mean, Schlafly, I have refused to debate Schlafly. This is a personal policy. I don't debate the issues of human freedom. I'm very glad when there are sisters who have the generosity and the sanctity to suffer fools gladly who will debate them. I do not. That's not my thing. I wouldn't debate Hugh Hefner in the old day. I don't debate Phyllis Schlafly, and I just don't do it. Because they lie all the time. You're up there marshaling your facts and saying your truth, and then they say these things that have just landed from someplace with little fear. They're lie. So, if there's nothing, and if you value words, I mean, it makes you crazy. And I gave up totally on Schlafly. I mean, I used to have fantasies about Schlafly. You know, like every feminist has rescue fantasies. You have your list of 5 or 10 women, and the feminist Amazonian troop will come in and sweep these women off to some wonderful retreat in the forest where we will feed them herbal tea and chicken soup and talk to them, and they will realize that they were abused children, abused wives, and they will suddenly say, "Lo!" and they will emerge and they will be feminists. I mean, we all have these fantasies. We have these fantasies. So, because we know it is in them. I mean, we really know it is. And once in a while, every time you're about to give up these fantasies, something happens that is absolutely real. Anita Bryant did stand up some years ago in Florida and say she was very sorry for all the lives that she had hurt, all of the women, all of the gay people, all of the, but she had been beaten by her husband and her pastor to make her do these things. I mean, and the press didn't give it much cover. So we know that there's real women buried under these Stepford people, but it's very hard to get it. And I finally gave up my fantasy about Schlafly when we were doing I was in some city doing a television show, and they had wanted us to debate, and I'd said, no, I was terribly sorry, no way, boring. And so they put us on separately. I said, you can have whoever you want on your show, but then have us in separate segments. So, okay, that's what. So there I am in the green room having my little cup of tea, and in she walks. And she sort of, toddled up. And she introduced herself, and I was very courteous. I mean, my mother would have been proud of me. I was very courteous. And we chatted for a while. And then finally I said, this is why I still had the feminist fantasy, so we had plenty of time to go. And I sort of thought, okay, we won't confront. We'll try to come in under the radar here. So I said, listen, Phyllis, one thing I've been really curious about, you say all the time you're attacking us for driving women out of the home, and the battered women are runaway wives and not facing their responsibilities, and that we are busting up the family, and women shouldn't be in the workforce, and women are in the workforce because they need to eat, their children need food, and you're all the time around the country lecturing and doing media and stuff, and you have a family, and you have, so how come it doesn't apply to you? And didn't you just recently go back to law school? And what do you think about that? And I said, it's very nice. I mean, very, very nice. It was sort of like, hi, I'm a friendly feminist, CR 101. And she said, oh, absolutely. No, I mean, if it hadn't been for the women's movement, I wouldn't have gone back to law school. And I had my tea, you know, I had my tea, and my mouth and my tea, and I said, you know that? And she said, oh, yes, absolutely. No, I mean, you should give credit where it's due. I mean, it was the women's movement changed my consciousness. And my tea in my mouth. And I said, why? Well, doesn't that tell you something? I mean, I was so stunned that I lost my tactics for my feminist fantasy, which was like, you move on to the, I mean, I don't know what. I just was aghast. So, and she said, that's quite beside the point. And I said, well, what is, if it changed, do you think this is a help for your life? And she said, oh, yes. I said, well, then, don't you think for other women? I mean, what, how? And they came, and they got her, and her segment was on first, and I sat there in the green room, and I watched her on the monitor screen, and she went out, and it was just like somebody had dropped a quarter in her head, and she came out, and they drive women into the workforce, and they will make unisex bathrooms, and they will, and they're anti-family, and they're baby killers, and they don't understand what real women want, and they're destroying the family. And so then it was my turn, so I came on, and I thought, well, this is really terrible. I mean, I shouldn't, because this was a private conversation. And then I thought, well, the personal, I thought, is political. So I said, I'm frankly still aghast. I mean, I really am gasping here for air, because I just heard Ms. Schlafly, you know, in her segment say da-da-da-da. And in the green room, she was saying da-da. And I think this is an example of the thrall in which she's held by the ultra-right. Perhaps she was afraid they would off her if she told the truth, but I do find it a strange schism, and what we're about is in fact trying to tell the truth about our lives, both backstage and on stage. But at that point I thought to myself, wow, I don't know if I could, I mean, somebody else should take her to the feminist retreat and give her the chicken soup, because I don't even think I'm up. I mean, I think I've done my bit, and I couldn't. It was it was like stories you read about Goebbels and the big lie. Just tell the big lie, and the bigger the better, and you know it's a lie. The sheer cynicism of it took my breath away, you know. So that's Phyllis Schlafly. When it's women of the far right who are not well known and garnering a hell of a lot of perks for doing what she's doing and being the glove on the hand of the fist of the patriarchy. When it's ordinary folks, I feel very differently. And there's a remarkable book, in fact, about right-wing women by Andrea Dworkin, which if you haven't read, I heartily recommend. I mean, Andrea spent some years really researching what it is that drives women into or keeps women in the far right. And how we address that, and what we can do, in fact, to give them an alternate place to go. It's a very interesting study, and I think it's begun to be practiced in a number of places, not without interesting results. There was somebody over there, yeah.
I wanted to hear your thoughts how you were using the phrase feminists and men of conscience. I'd like to know your reasoning why you use that phrase.
Okay. There are many feminists who refer to male feminists and, you know, female feminists, male feminists. I don't. For a number of reasons. There's very little that women, as the majority of the human species, have that is our own. And while you can make a very sort of moderate, middle-of-the-road definition of feminism that simply says a feminist is someone who believes in equal rights for women and men, and that's a fair definition. To me, actually, feminism means a whole lot more of other things. I mean, I do see it, and I don't mean this in a hyperbolic way, I do see it as the politics of the 21st century, because I don't see the species surviving unless, in fact, it releases the intelligence and the creative solutions that more than half of it has been having and trying to get heard and has been squashed down. So if I think of feminism in those enormous terms, as in effect the cause that is capable of saving the planet, and that women are uniquely poised at this moment in history to do so, not because we're better than or inherently this or that, but because of this unique moment, then all the valences that I attribute to feminism, at this point, I so far still want to keep for women. So much of what, I mean, the tendency of men in patriarchy, and what men in patriarchy have been trained to do, is to leap from ignoring us to co-opting us. This is not only true, I might add, of women. This is true of whites about blacks. I mean, the running in fear from black power, and the next moment whites running around with dashikis. Now these days it's everybody, all the Anglo people desperately trying to be Indian. So there's always a rip-off of the oppressed as being more spiritual than or better than, and it's kind of like the white man's burden. Oh, you're so noble and savage, I will keep you that way, and then either ignore you or immediately co-opt you and take it for myself. And I think that's an act of disrespect to the oppressed, whoever the oppressed are. So I'd like to keep feminist and feminism as a term that I use for women. But I do think that there are men who are anti-sexist, there are men who are anti-patriarchal, there are men who are men of, or under the general heading, men of conscience. And that's the reason that I specify that faint, imperceptible difference. I would hope that the time would come when it wouldn't be possible for it to be ripped off, because it would so much be a politics of human consciousness all over the planet that we would all be very proud to be a part of that. And women would feel imitation as the highest form of flattery from men, as opposed to feeling co-opted as soon as we come up with something. But I don't think that time is yet, and I'm not eager for us to give up the what little we have. I find that men who are serious about this politics, and serious about being of real support, not just lip service, to women in their own individual lives and to the ideas of feminism and the women's movement and the transformation of humanity in that respect, in every way, because we're not talking about reform, we're really talking about revolution in the profoundest sense, not bang bang, but sexual, physiological, psychological, political, social, economic, the works, you name it. I find that men who do have that commitment worry less about what they're called and are quite pleased to be called men of conscience or anti-sexist men. It would be the Bly boys who would be more interested in labels and in themselves and in what they can get from it, as opposed to what can be given so that the species survives and the planet survives. It's that fine distinction. Yeah.
I have a three-part question.
Three-part, okay.
The first question deals with how are the educated women going to communicate with the non-educated? Second, women that have going to connect with the women that have not. And the last, are women moving forward?
Are women...
Moving forward? Are we losing ground?
And the last was, are women moving forward or are we moving around? I think that the first two, how are women who are educated going to communicate with women who are not, and how are women who have going to communicate with those who have not, in a sense is the same question. And I think I can speak primarily only to one side of that question, because I have the privilege of being an educated woman. I don't have a BA, but I'm an educated woman. I think it is the task of the educated woman to start from the assumption that if a woman is not educated, or even in fact if a woman is non-literate, does not mean she's stupid. Quite the contrary. I think the most profound feminism that I have ever learned, I have learned from non-literate women in the Palestinian refugee camps, in the rice paddies of the Philippines, in the back islands of the Pacific, in the favelas of Brazil. All those places where we're told women aren't interested in feminism. And where, in fact, if you go with preconceived notions, of course you don't find it. If you go to listen and learn, wow, blows you head off. If that's not feminism, I don't know what is. I think if we start as educated women with the assumption that when we are communicating with women who have less education, we are there to learn. And I don't mean fake humility, and I don't mean noble savage crap. I mean we are there to learn. I mean that we are really open to hearing what their requirements are, what their demands are, what their needs are. They will be forthcoming with those. Because the other side of the equation is one that only those women who are less privileged can answer. But I can tell you from having seen it all over the world that those women are organizing in highly sophisticated ways, and that if we get off our high horse for a minute to simply stop and listen to them, they make it very clear what their requirements are, what their needs are, where we can be of help and support, where we should butt out,